Everyone, my name is Sarah Keating and I'm the Vice Consul at the Consulate General of Ireland here in Chicago. Thank you for joining us here today as we mark the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia, or IDAHOT as it's also referred to. The International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia and Biphobia takes place each year on the 17th of May and is a global occasion to draw attention to violence and discrimination experienced by lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex people across the world. As part of our foreign policy, Ireland remains committed to promoting the rights of LGBTI+ individuals who continue to suffer disproportionate levels of violence and face systemic discrimination in many countries. As such, we are delighted to join colleagues in our missions across the world today as we mark this important day. Today's event will be recorded and will be available to watch back or share with friends who may have not been able to join us today. We encourage you to use the chat box to say hello and let us know where you're joining us from today. We will also have the opportunity for audience Q&A at the end, so please feel free to ask any questions you may have both in the chat box or using the Q&A function. We have a really interesting event lined up today. A little later, we will hear from our panelists, Dr. Maurice Casey, historian in residence at Epic Museum, and Michael Collins, Executive Director of Irish Community Services based here in Chicago. But first, I'm going to hand over to our Consul General, Kevin Byrne, who's going to talk a little about Ireland's work and policies on LGBTI rights. Kevin, over to you. Kevin, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Sorry, I had some Zoom glitches. Thanks, Sarah, and welcome everyone. It's great to have you join us for this event. Just before we go to the two main speakers, I just wanted to give a little bit of background on Ireland's work in LGBT rights and equality, not just at home, but also internationally as well. In terms of our own national policy, it's been quite a journey in Ireland over the last 25 or 30 years. The decriminalisation of homosexuality didn't happen in Ireland until 1993, so really quite a late date. And then there was quite a journey right up until 2015, when Ireland became the first country in the world to vote for marriage equality for gays and lesbians by popular vote. 2015 was also important for members of the trans community in Ireland. Ireland passed the Gender Recognition Act, which is one of the most forward-thinking and progressive gender recognition acts for members of the trans community, and it really allows members of the community to self-declare on passports, birth certs, driver's licenses and other state documents. Only in recent years, we've also launched the world's first national LGBTI youth strategy, which looks right across the work of government and public bodies and looks at what they can do to help to make the experience for young members of the LGBTI community more, to make it better for them in their daily lives. There's a particular focus on combating bullying in schools and in sports clubs and whatnot. So that's a first in the world, and something that Ireland is very proud to have put in place. 2019, then we put in place our national LGBTI inclusion strategy. There's about 100 different actions there for public bodies to properly welcome and ensure the equality of members of the LGBTI community. Not just at home, but also abroad, Ireland is really keen to ensure and to champion the rights of the LGBTI community. In our diaspora strategy, which was launched just last November, so it runs from 2020 to 2025, and really the focus of that diaspora strategy was to ensure that Ireland has a very broad and inclusive view of the Irish diaspora, and that meant not just looking at the diaspora that maybe we've always looked at over the last 30 or 40 years, but really looking to heal relationships with immigrants who would have left Ireland in times of crisis or as a result of discrimination. And again, for much of the history of the state, homosexuality was criminalised. So really many young men and women would have left Ireland because it wasn't a very welcoming place for members of that community. But now really the diaspora strategy is looking to ensure that I suppose we combat that discrimination and start to heal those relationships with our LGBTI diaspora overseas. What this looks like in practice and in principle is that there's now increased funding to organisations that would support members of the LGBTI community. Our embassies and our consulates overseas host events similar to this. We have lots of, in normal times, lots of our embassies and missions would have participated in pride parades, not just here in the West, but also in places where sometimes the level of discrimination is much, much greater. That also extends to bringing over speakers. So Panty Bliss, Rory O'Neill, the famed drag queen in Ireland and campaigner for equality, has travelled to a number of countries throughout Africa and Asia, speaking about LGBTI equality with our ambassadors and our embassies. And really that for us is very important to be able to share Ireland's story, to share our experience and our journey, and I suppose to speak about the importance of championing the rights of the LGBTI community. And then again, of course, in multilateral fora, in the European Union, in the United Nations, and others, Ireland speaks out and is right in front, promoting the rights of LGBTI individuals. So just we'll tweet some more of that throughout the day, so you'll get a sense of where Ireland is and what we stand for in this space. But now I'll hand back over to Sarah for the speakers. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to hear that all of the things we're up to all over the world, always really interesting. Now we'll turn over to our panel. Today we're going to hear from two speakers, one here in Chicago and another at home in Ireland. And we're going to learn about both the history of the LGBTI plus diaspora and also work being done today to ensure equal access to services for our LGBTI citizens. Dr. Maurice Casey is our first speaker. Dr. Maurice is the current Department of Foreign Affairs historian and residence at EPIC, the Irish Emigration Museum. He's the curator of a new exhibition called Out in the World, Ireland's LGBTQ plus diaspora. The exhibition will launch in Dublin in June before touring cities worldwide. Michael Collins is the Executive Director of Irish Community Services, a welfare and immigration services organisation on the northwest side of Chicago. Michael oversees the ongoing operations of the organisation, including strategic planning, budget, personnel and fundraising. Michael is involved in civic organisations and the Irish community locally and nationally. He is a board member of the Irish American Heritage Centre and treasurer of the Coalition of Irish Immigration Centres. Thank you both for joining us here today. Maurice, let's start with you first. As I mentioned, you're currently the Department of Foreign Affairs historian in residence at EPIC, the Immigration Museum in Dublin, which I think is a wonderful resource. Would really recommend everyone visits it the next time that they can get to Dublin. Can you start by telling us a little bit about that position and the aspects of immigration that you've chosen to focus your research on?
Sure. Well, thank you. Firstly, thanks everyone. Thank you to Sarah, to Sandra, and to Kevin for inviting me along to speak at IDAHOS. It's a great privilege and an honor to speak at such an important initiative. So my role here at EPIC as the Department of Foreign Affairs historian in residence really ties in very neatly with what Kevin described in terms of the Irish diaspora strategy. And specifically the Irish diaspora strategies focus on a very inclusive definition of the Irish diaspora, which links in very neatly with my own research interests. So I've been delighted in this role to shine different lights on hidden histories of the Irish abroad. That, for example, is the name of a lecture series that I've led here at EPIC. Each month we've looked at a different corner of Irish emigration history that's less considered. So we've looked at, for example, Ireland and the Black Atlantic, so the experience of both the Black Irish community, but also how the Irish abroad contributed to the construction of racial difference in the Atlantic world. We've also looked at Irish experiences of Irish Jewish communities, both Irish Jewish diasporas and the Irish and Jewish diasporas as different entities that collaborated and contested one another. And we've looked at Irish people behind bars in prison as well, actually going back to Chicagoland story. But the big project of the year has been this exhibition Out in the World, Ireland's LGBTQ plus diaspora.
Great. I believe you have some slides you're going to show us so we can get a bit of an overview of what the exhibit will look like. And I think also maybe you're going to just share with us some stories of what you found in your research while you've been looking into the LGBTQ plus diaspora.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will just do the standard thing of just bringing up the slides. And so I hope that's all okay. So I'll just quickly go on to show you our design, which is our great graphic designer, Joanne Byrne, produced for the exhibition. And so it's a Celtic knot reimagined through the pride colors and labeled with the 6 themes of our exhibition, which are exclusion, community, love, defiance, solidarity, and return. So the exhibition itself is arranged thematically rather than chronology, and it has a certain number of pillars or kind of methodological ideas that I set out when I went to research it. In looking at it thematically, what I want to do is suggest that we can never be comprehensive, right? We can never tell the story in its whole because it's such a vast story. These themes point to significant experiences, but they cannot encapsulate this community's history in its totality. In terms of the name of the exhibition, Out in the World, I think that that use of the term out gave me a very particular lens through which to research this. I decided that every single footnote, every single line that was sourced in the exhibition, every single source that the exhibition is built on someone speaking in their own voice. So for example, well-known figures who you might expect to see in an exhibition of this kind, like Roger Casement or Oscar Wilde, don't feature. In part, that's because they're well-known, but it's also because I didn't want to tell a story through a diary that someone never wanted revealed or a criminal record. I wanted people to speak in their own voices and to highlight those voices. Then in terms of picking the stories, I wanted to find the diversity, not in terms of, in sort of obvious terms in like gender and sexuality, but also in where people arrived to, where they left from, but also chronology. So we tell stories from 2 centuries of LGBTQ plus emigration. The next pillar was shared authority. So ensuring that everyone who's featured and is involved feels like a kind of a co-curator in a way, or you know, has a control over their own story and how it's represented and told. So that was very important. And then the last pillar is that the exhibition is there to provide a platform. I call it Ireland's LGBTQ plus diaspora, and that's because I don't want to make any claim to representing a story that I do not represent. I think that intersex stories absolutely matter and should be told, but we don't have one featured in the exhibition. The plus also gives us that scope to say that there are more stories to be told, and this is a space for us to tell them as well. So hopefully if there is an intersex person watching today, I'd love you to get in touch with me because I'd love to tell your story in this exhibition too. So I thought that I'd also just quickly run you through some of the US linked stories to give you an idea of what we feature on the exhibition panels themselves. The first story is one of my favorite ones, not just in terms of this project, but stories that I've researched really to date. And it's about Bridget Call and Chris Morrissey. Bridget Call was born in Donegal in 1934, and she left home at 16 to train as a nun in England. Later in 1960, in Albany, New York, where her convent was based, she met the love of her life, another nun by the name of Chris Morrissey. They started a relationship within the convent, and in 1981, they moved together to Pinochet's Chile. And here they were influenced by liberation theology and feminist thought and became involved in the resistance to the military dictatorship in Chile. In 1989, once that dictatorship was collapsing, they returned to Chris Morrissey's native Canada. And when they realized that Bridget could not get permanent residency rights as the same-sex partner of Chris, a Canadian, they initiated a constitutional challenge, which eventually led to same-sex partners being granted the same rights for immigration as heterosexual spouses. Another story which I think will be familiar to anyone who's kind of interested or invested in this history of the LGBTQ plus diaspora is the story of the St. Patrick's Day battles. So as many of you will know, particularly in New York, where the St. Patrick's Day parade on Fifth Avenue was organized by the Ancient Order of Hibernians, there was a quite long running struggle to actually have Irish lesbians and gay men included in that St. Patrick's Day march. It was not until 2016 actually that you had an Irish identified lesbian and gay group marching in that parade. And so that story is also reflected in our exhibition, both in New York, and also what many people forget as well is that there was also a group in Boston that undertook a Supreme Court challenge to march in the Boston Parade. And then another US-linked story that I wanted to highlight as well. It's also kind of going back further in the history. It's a really remarkable story. It's what I call, it's kind of our most efficient panel because it fits in so many stories in one. Chester A. Arthur III, you may recognize the name because it's the name of the 21st US president, Chester A. Arthur. So that president's grandson was a bisexual astrologer named Chester A. Arthur III. And in 1921, he traveled to Ireland seeking a reconnection with his ancestral roots and became involved in the Irish Civil War. There he became known to a wider network of queer-identified Irish Republicans, including this woman in the middle, Kathleen O'Brennan, who had previously, before she lived in Ireland, lived in Portland on the northwest United States, where she'd been in a romantic relationship with an Irish-Italian woman radical named Marie Equi. And then there's this woman on the right, Esther Murphy. Esther Murphy became Chester A. Arthur III's second wife, and she was another bisexual woman, and she was from a wealthy New York family. They were part of New York Irish American family who owned the Mark Cross leather goods, luxury leather goods brand. And they were like, that family was something straight out of the Great Gatsby. In fact, literally, so Esther Murphy's brother was a model and a friend of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he became a model for some of F. Scott Fitzgerald's characters. So those are some of the stories, and they kind of tell you a little bit about the expansiveness. It's about diversity, and it's also about what the point that we're making with the exhibition is that there's no sort of niche, siloed experience called LGBTQ plus emigration that's distinct. LGBTQ plus stories are a part of every facet of Irish emigration history in places where you might be surprised, like with Bridget Call, it's about how that is a part of Catholic social justice and about that form of religious emigration. Or with Chester Arthur, it's about this sort of return emigration. So really it's about identifying those stories in every corner where Irish people have ended up and in every way that they have managed to get there. So thanks.
Thanks, Maura. Some really fascinating stories there. And I think we're all very excited for when the exhibition will be launched. I think you're planning to launch it around June of this year. Is that right?
That's right. So it'll launch in Epic on June 8th. So if anyone's in Dublin, they can come visit it in Dublin. And then, well, we're hoping that all the consulates as well can get it out as soon as it's safe to do so. And so bring people into the consulates as well. I know, yeah, there's a number of different cities as well where it'll be launching. Hopefully as soon as we can get it to you and as soon as you can all gather together and see it.
Fantastic. Well, we'll definitely be very much interested in having it here in Chicago, I think. I thought it was really interesting, the point you made about not wanting to tell the story of people who had been, writing personal things in their diary, or people who weren't actively, openly telling their stories. And I think, we've seen in recent years, I guess most recently in the two referenda in Ireland, both the repeal the 8th referendum and the marriage equality referendum, just how important personal storytelling can be in changing people's hearts and minds on social issues. Do you think that well, first of all, why did you choose to take that approach? And then also, do you think that approach is more impactful in what the exhibit, will show to the world, I guess?
Yeah, so it's kind of for a number of reasons. I mean, I think that it's a perfectly valid scholarly approach to write this history through criminal records and so on. And I know plenty of great scholars who do so, and who do so sensitively and empathetically, and trying to read these sources against the grain. I guess I like a challenge, and I wanted to see if I could to tell this story in that way and through personal narratives. And I think it does actually precisely come back to what you said about the referendums and the importance of personal testimony to those referendums, because I trace both the beginning of my career in a way and my political awareness to those referendums. I finished my undergrad in 2015 and I was doing my dissertation, and there was this talk of this marriage equality referendum. So I had to come up with an idea for a dissertation, and I went to the National Library of Ireland and I found the Irish Queer Archive. that just really opened my mind to this whole history, and that's kind of underpinned my research since then. So yeah, the personal testimony, I think, is a really important tool. I think it brings people in. I always kind of ground my histories in personal stories, but I think it's also about respect and try and feeling the need to be trusted with these stories. And I have a responsibility, not just to the person who I'm speaking to on Zoom who's featured and is living, or his family members. I also have a responsibility to people of the early 20th century as well, that I treat their stories with respect. So that kind of underpins the idea.
Great, thank you. We'll come back to some more questions in a while. Now we're going to just head over to Michael for a minute. So it's been great to hear about some of the history and some of the stories, but now Michael, you're going to tell us a bit about working with the Irish diaspora every day. I guess Irish Community Services works with Irish people on a variety of issues and providing a number of services, but more recently you've begun a new partnership with Howard Brown Health and the Alzheimer's Association of Chicago. Can you tell us a bit more about this program and why you think now is a good time an important time to run a program like this?
Yeah, so for the past 2.5 years, we've been running small groups and activities surrounding memory loss and dementia-friendly. We've done a dementia-friendly Irish Fest. So we've really tried to, make a concerted effort to bring these folks who otherwise would be excluded from traditional Irish events due to their, memory loss and their personal circumstances. We've tried to include them into Irish cultural events that they can relate to, that they've participated in for the bulk of their lives. And now as they get older, their memory starts to fade a little bit, and all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more difficult for them to engage in these events that they've enjoyed again throughout their entire lives. So throughout this kind of journey, we've partnered with the Alzheimer's Association on numerous events. We ran a memory support group for a long time. And then that had kind of, got our relationship with the Alzheimer's Association to a very good level. And Paul Dowling, my colleague, who's actually supposed to be on this panel, unfortunately he's ill today, has done quite a bit of work with them. And one of the things that we try to do at ICS is, our mission here is to serve, empower, and connect the Irish and Irish American community of the Midwestern United States. And that really includes all aspects of that community. Including the LGBT community, including the, including seniors. And this was a perfect caveat to combine those two. So we're doing an event in partnership with the Alzheimer's Association. It's a virtual community forum focusing on the LGBT senior population. And one thing that I found particularly interesting was that there's 2.7 million LGBTQ residents in the United States over the age of 50. And so that's, that obviously indicates that there's a significant population out there that would benefit from this service. I would say a decent cohort of that would have Irish connections or would be involved in the Irish community in some way, shape, or form, or even part of the Irish diaspora that have moved from Ireland to the United States. So we really try to be, in terms of our programming, we try to engage all aspects of our community. I mean, we've done a little bit skewing off, but in the wake of everything around racial equality, we've started a colorful campaign highlighting diversity within the Irish community, and this very much falls in line with that same idea and that same premise that we really want to be inclusive to everyone in the Irish community. And so the partnership with the Alzheimer's Association is, we jumped at the opportunity because we've had this long existing relationship with them, but it also gives us an opportunity to engage with LGBT community members that otherwise we wouldn't have engaged with or have not been engaged with other Irish community organizations. So a chance for them to reconnect, to their Irish roots in kind of a welcoming format and in a way that serves them better. As well, if as a community organization, we do try to reach out to all aspects. So if there's people that we're missing, and the LGBTQ community very well may be one of them, we do want to reach out an olive branch and say, look, you are welcome with ICS, you're welcome within the community as a whole, and we're trying to provide services to, to better serve you as well as the remainder of the Irish community that we service through our other programs. And then the other points I'd kind of like to make, obviously in the wake of what had happened over the summer with the racial equality movement, it's become very clear that we're not in a post-racist society, and we're also very much not in a post-homophobic society. So this is a continual struggle. This is something that continually needs to be on the forefront. So the more that community organizations like ours can do to bring folks into the fold and to make them feel welcome and to, provide services to them is definitely something that is within our remit and within our mission statement. So the event that we're partnering with is being held on Thursday, June 3rd from 5:30 to 7 p.m. in, that's Chicago Central Time. And it's an opportunity to, as I said, to connect with folks who might be experiencing memory loss, who are LGBT, community members. And again, sometimes reaching these folks, specific events tailored towards their community makes them feel a little bit more welcome, and obviously provides a much needed service that ICS is happy to provide in partnership with.
Thanks, Michael. And I mean, I can just speak from my own personal experience, but anytime we've done anything with ICS, it's always been fantastic and a very welcoming community. So I would definitely encourage anybody who's on the call who knows of anybody who might be interested in this program to please share it around. I just see a few questions coming in. Is there an opportunity for volunteers to get involved in the program, Michael? Is it going to be online? And is there also opportunity for family members or people who offer support in their daily lives to LGBTQ community members who have Alzheimer's?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're looking to get involved, the best thing to do is contact our office, and we're happy to see if we can arrange a way to get folks involved. One of the things that we have run, as I mentioned previously, we ran a support group that was based for folks suffering from memory loss, but as well, their support network, so their family, friends who would be helping them through these struggles. And then in terms of volunteering, that kind of depends on what skill set you have and what what you're looking to get out of volunteering for an event like this. So the best thing to do in that circumstance is to contact our office. And then, Paul will probably have an informal conversation with you about kind of what volunteering you're comfortable with and what aspect, what your skill set is that you might be able to bring. So I'll just provide kind of our contact details. So if you are interested in getting involved, you can do so. So you can email pdowling@irishchicago.org. Additionally, all of the information about the event itself is on our social media handles and is on our website. So you can visit our website at www.irishchicago.org to register. But as the pandemic starts to ease up, at least here in the United States, it looks like it's heading in the right direction. Hopefully many of these programs will become more in person. And that'll provide further opportunities for volunteering, further opportunities for engagement, and further support, support groups and things of that nature.
Great, thank you, Michael. I just have one more question from myself, and then we'll go on to audience questions. So we do actually have quite a lot of questions from the audience. This question, I guess, is sort of for both of you. Kevin, I think, mentioned in his first piece, and Maurice, you mentioned it as well, about how, some members of the diaspora will have left Ireland, because they didn't feel welcome. And some people might still be, I guess, wary around engaging on topics such as LGBTI rights or topics that they don't feel that they have experience in or they don't have knowledge on, or may even be a little bit hesitant, to engage on these topics or with this community. I guess what sort of role do you see, maybe your exhibit, Maurice, and Michael, the work that ICS do in, kind of opening this wider conversation around lesser known diaspora stories, engaging with our diaspora members who might feel unwelcome in the Irish diaspora, and how we can work to better make those people feel welcome. I don't know who would like to go first.
I'm happy to kick it off. So from a local level here in Chicago, you know, one of the things that my colleague Paul was you know, unfortunately he's ill today. He was supposed to be on here, but Paul created a great initiative a few years back called At Home Abroad, and that was really an opportunity for people within the LGBT community who had you know, emigrated from Ireland to the United States or Australia or where have you, to share their experiences of being, you know, a member of the LGBT community and emigrating abroad. So that was one of the great initiatives that he had created, and provided a forum just for sharing of experiences, which sometimes is extremely helpful when, you know, when you are making such a big move in your life. To make sure that, you know, the experiences of others you can read about, you might be able to connect and build a network upon arrival, and things like that. And as well, you know, if you are thinking of emigrating and if you are coming to a community center, ICS is just based in the Midwest, but there's 12 Irish immigration centers throughout the United States. And I would say a bulk of them do provide some programming towards the LGBT diaspora. So, you know, even if you end up in New York or Boston or something along those lines, there is a network there for you. There is support services there for you. So if you're looking to get involved, you know, the important thing is to know that you're not alone, and that there's networks that you can call upon and stories that you can relate to, that might help you through that journey.
Great, thanks. Maurice, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm sure. Sarah, if I understand the question correctly, it's about, so how can the exhibition or the work of the exhibition help to help people connect with Ireland who may have left as a result of feeling out of place in Ireland? Well, thinking as a historian, it's not incidental that, of course, this exhibition is supported by the Department of Foreign Affairs. Because that's the story of Ireland's transformation as well. I can imagine for many people, I would have interviewed to them in the 1970s, the idea that such an exhibition like this would have been funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs would have been almost unimaginable, right? This is a state that not only considered legally criminal, but when groups went for funding for AIDS information in 1985, they were rejected by the state. So the state wouldn't even provide funding for that in a crisis situation. And here it is funding an exhibition. So there's a story about the developments of the Irish state there. And I hope that people will find, and I hope that people find this in my research more broadly. And it's what I aim to do, which is to provide a sense of recognition. I think that the greatest moment of my research career so far has not necessarily been finishing my PhD or getting things published. It was a moment at an event in 2018 at the London Irish LGBT Network in London, where I gave a history of the gay rights movement in Ireland. And I specifically didn't just look at the legal campaign, I looked at how women's groups were involved and how you know, different sort of progressive groups were involved. And a woman who had been active in the movement came up to me afterwards and said, that's the first time the history was told as I experienced it. And that's what I hope people will get a sense of when they get the exhibition, that this is the history as they experienced it, and that will provide a sense of recognition. But I don't want them to feel as if this is the state getting off the hook. And I think that the main story that we need to talk about, and I think that the story that really is important, and particularly when we think of the year that we've just had with a pandemic, is the story of HIV/AIDS in the Irish diaspora. And one of my colleagues, Darrell Leeworthy, cites the remarkable statistic which tells an entire history, which is that more Irish people died with AIDS in London than died with AIDS in Ireland. And that is a story about the care that was denied them at home. So I think it's important that we have these challenging conversations, and that the platform hopefully can be, the exhibition can hopefully be a platform for them.
Great. And yeah, I mean, I think it is, you know, I think sometimes we forget, you know, even when I was watching say reading in the ears yesterday. It was on 2015, so there was a piece on the marriage equality referendum, and sometimes it's easy to forget, even as Kevin mentioned, that homosexuality was only decriminalized in 1993. You know, this was all in our lifetimes. This was not that, we're not talking about, you know, ancient history, that a lot of these changes have come around so recently, and that there is still, you know, there's still work to be done. There's still conversations to have. And, you know, we hope that having events like these will help start some of those conversations, and, you know, reaching out that hand to members of the diaspora who may have felt unwelcome up until now, that, you know, that it's important that we're doing this now. I guess on sort of on that theme a little bit, Maurice, is a question from the audience. When you were interviewing people for the exhibition, were there a lot of people who spoke about their relationship with Ireland and how that relationship may have changed as they've seen some of the social change that we've seen in Ireland?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone talked about that. Everyone talked about the importance of the marriage equality referendum. Even though certainly for an older generation of LGBTQ plus immigrants, marriage is not something that's necessarily something that they aspire for or whatever, but and they're happy that it is there and that those rights are there. And I guess there's always a sense, certainly in people who've always been long-term activists, of not resting on your laurels and always realizing that there's a lot of work to be done. One of my interviewees, Terry Stewart, you know, he talks about how in Ireland, the Ireland that he left in the 1970s, it was hard to be a gay man, but it was also hard to be a straight woman, in terms of the, you know, he knew women in London who had left because they just felt that they couldn't be single women and pursue their lives in Ireland. So it's about recognizing that change, and it's about recognizing how broad that change has been. And people are proud of Ireland, and people are proud of what Ireland now stands for in the imagination, right? I think actually we still need to maybe work hard to, there's an idea of Ireland as this progressive bastion, and then there's certain realities that undermine that as they exist in Ireland, like the direct provision system for asylum seekers, for example. But I think that Kevin very rightly pointed out the Gender Recognition Act as a model to the world. I think that that's really important. Of course, things can be improved on. There could be better trans healthcare in Ireland. But where I did my PhD in the UK, for example, where you have a very conscious effort to roll back trans rights, it's important that we talk about how we introduced that legislation, the sky didn't fall in, people just get to be themselves. I think that's important that we also talk about that whenever we're talking about Ireland's transformation.
Mm-hmm. And I guess that's you know, important in the role that we play, that Ireland plays on a multilateral and international stage. You know, like you say, telling those stories of the things that we have done in Ireland, as, you know, a sort of combat, I guess, to when we see regression in rights around the rest of the world, especially, you know, where we see rights that exist today but are being, you know, whittled away at. You know, it's very important to have that international voice on these type of issues. Michael, a question for you in relation to the dementia and Alzheimer's program. I mean, do you find, or I guess, is this something that you're conscious of when running this program, that I guess having conversations with members of the community who have Alzheimer's, that it could bring back a lot of memories from their youth, or when they faced, you know, trauma, or, you know, where they faced discrimination, bullying perhaps, or even, you know, their own internal difficulties in coming to terms with their sexuality and identity? Is that something that you will be looking out for, or will be catered for in the new program that you're running?
Yeah, it absolutely will be. I mean, I think Alzheimer's, you know, as an illness or as a condition that folks receive, one of the things that I found, at least within my own relatives and with the folks that we've worked with through the various groups that we've hosted already, is that they do tend to relate to things in the past, you know, at least in the initial stages of Alzheimer's. And so, you know, we do expect there to be you know, once we do reach out and the program gets underway, hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll have an in-person program. But one of the things that we're trying to establish through that is the welcoming space, right? So if folks are of LGBT and had experienced discrimination, whether it be in Ireland or other places, you know, even through informal conversations that I've had, I've spoken with LGBT Irish immigrants that have immigrated to the United States to a little bit more conservative areas, and then have ultimately found themselves in places like Chicago and New York, which were a little bit more welcoming. And then that is ultimately down to the fact that, you know, unfortunately, in certain parts of the United States, there are still, you know, there are still barriers and challenges that people need to overcome. So, you know, sometimes it's always not Ireland or the past that they've experienced within Ireland, but it's maybe the first place they've emigrated to, being someone from the outside, being somebody, you know, who might have a little bit of a different personal story than kind of the traditional folks who live in that specific area. So you know, it's kind of all encompassing, really. I mean, we're hoping to create a welcoming space. We're hoping to provide a platform for folks to share these stories and to make sure that you know, that they are welcome in our community. We Chicago has always been kind of a welcoming city. Obviously, there's still progress to be made. But we hope, at least within our community and with kind of the aging LGBT community, that we can have an impact and we can provide that platform for them to share their experiences and as a whole move to a better spot.
Great, thanks, Michael. I mean, definitely is, you know, a step in the right direction, having that, you know, the community there that people can reach out to. Mark, another question's coming for you in relation to your research. Was there any your research obviously is looking at Irish people all over the world. Was there any parts of the world that you were particularly surprised to receive stories from? And also, if people are viewing your exhibition, or even if there's people here that feel they have stories to share after this event, are you still accepting stories? Are you still looking to hear from people?
Yeah, great. So surprising stories or surprising locations. I would say there are the two most surprising. Bridget Call, who I mentioned, the Chile aspect surprised me. I didn't expect to find an Irish lesbian in Chile. That's a surprising sentence, I guess, in a way. But also we feature a story of Colette O'Regan. Colette O'Regan, she is a wonderful activist and champion of LGBT rights in Ireland, but she also volunteered overseas in Cambodia, and in 2014 she was part of the group alongside a number of Cambodian LGBTQ+ activists who founded a rainbow organization, Kampuchea, which is the first LGBTQ+ organization recognized by the Cambodian state. So that to me was remarkable, that an Irish woman was there organizing that important organization in Cambodia. And then another really surprising story for me was the story of Michael Dillon, who's not someone who's known about necessarily in Ireland. He was I call him a transgender healthcare pioneer. He was the first known case of a trans man to undergo a genital reconstruction surgery, which he did in the 1940s while he was studying at Trinity College in Dublin. He, in fact, was born in England, but from an Anglo-Irish family. So his family inherited the baronetcy of Lismullen in County Meath. And that actually, even though he was legally registered under his name, Michael Dillon, from the 1940s onwards, in 1958, a UK tabloid was basically outed him as a trans man by tracing the lineage of the baronetcy of Lismullen, County Meath, and finding that it came to the name under which he was registered at birth. In response both to that outing and the negative press attention, but also a developing interest in Buddhism, which was partly encouraged by a rather unusual Hoth-based Buddhist monk, Michael Dillon traveled to India, and that's where he lived out the last years of his life, and he was one of the first Westerners ordained as a Buddhist monk. So you have this Anglo-Irish trans man who became a Buddhist monk. So that to me was a really surprising story, which ends up in India, and that's where Michael Dillon writes his memoir, and he sends it to a publishing house in London, and it arrives there shortly before he died in 1962. So again, he ensured that his story could be told in his words and on his terms.
Wow, that's a fascinating story for sure. One last question.
Just to quickly say that because people want to know if they could submit their stories. Yes, we will be doing a call for people to submit their stories, and there'll be an online portal for you to do so. So that'll be at outintheworld.ie, which is not yet launched, but that's the domain that you will go to in early June. And so you can submit your stories there.
Great, thanks so much. We'll be sure to share that around with people when it is launched. One last question for you, Maurice, I think, and then we'll probably wrap it up. Just a question about when people came to the US and might have found that big US cities provided a safe space for people to live their lives. Do you think that this impact on Ireland's diaspora then reflected back to Ireland and maybe was a help in how Ireland began to modernize its own perspective on LGBT rights, or on, various social issues like you mentioned already, women's rights and all of that?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I think that the story of every political transformation in Ireland since the famine has included a diaspora component. The diaspora has been normally influential, sometimes for better or for worse. But the diaspora is always a component, and that's certainly the case in the transformation of LGBTQ plus rights. One of the themes of the exhibition is return, and that's because mobility is so important to the story. For example, the first gay couple ever seen on RTE, that was a man from Cork and his Australian partner, who he met abroad, and then they came back home. But also in terms of the US, one of the first sources I actually came across was, I was looking through old issues of One. One was the magazine of like an early gay rights movement, so a pre-Stonewall US gay rights movement. And in a 1962 issue of One, in their letters page, they had a letter from Connemara. It was an anonymous writer writing from Connemara, and he identified himself as a gay Irish man who had left Connemara in 1920, and he had moved to the US, and he had spent decades in the US living as a gay man. So in the I guess what you'd call the gay underground of the US at that time. He also noted at the end of his letter that he had received his issues of One magazine in Ireland through the gay underground in Ireland, which he referred to as the underground. So absolutely, at the dawn of Irish civil rights activism on behalf of LGBTQ plus people, there were return immigrants, and that was enormously important in bringing home models of community and bringing home models of activism, because people went abroad to find out that this identity was not something to be ashamed of. It was something that could be celebrated and lived openly, and they brought that model home. And I think absolutely the diaspora is essential to that story.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks to both Maurice and Michael for joining us here today. And thank you to everybody who tuned in, recognizing the importance of IDAHOT and of marking today. It's been wonderful to hear and learn so much from the history of the community, the stories, right up to the work that's going on today. We very much look forward to hearing more about ICS's work, and Maurice, when your exhibition is launched, that's, I think, going to be fantastic, and we'll definitely have a lot of interest in it over here in the Midwest, and I'm sure across the US as well. Just to remind everyone that today's event was recorded and will be shared across our social media and our website in the next few days. So please feel free to share with anyone you think might have been interested in today's conversation who wasn't able to make it. Be sure to follow us across our social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're at Ireland Chicago and everything to keep up to date on our upcoming events. And we'll also be posting more about the work of EPIC and of ICS And you can find both ICS and Maurice across social media as well if you want to reach out on today's conversations. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our attendees. And I hope that everyone has a happy and a healthy week. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.